On this edition of ITG, the Mountaineers have their new defensive coordinator and other hires for Rich Rodriguez's, 2.0 edition of his first staff and Morgantown start to come together. All of that and more on this edition of In the Gun.
You are now watching Believe.
ITG.
With Wes, Owen, and Jed.
I've got the best teammates in the business here, all right?
No way!
They both played the game. They both know the game. Owen is the runaway beer truck known for having some fun.
Owen Schmitt, you have a podcast, In the Gun.
Owen Schmitt, like a runaway beer truck down the sidelines.
Jed is the signal caller who is the X's and O's and the brainiac. So we've combined those two skill sets.
Skills I've acquired over a very long career.
You are In the Gun.
Once you enter this family, no getting out.
In the Gun, episode 224 of your new favorite WVU football podcast. I am Wes Uhler. Got the best teammates in the business. We've got the signal caller, Jed Drenning. And it's time for another big edition of ITG as the Mountaineers have a defensive coordinator. This is the Zac Alley episode, if you will. Listen, we thought about just taking a couple knees, getting to the end of the year here, starting fresh in 2025. But when you got as much moving and shaking, despite all this craziness, Jed and I did have to hop on here to discuss Zac Alley and a couple other bells and whistles, of course. It is now post-Christmas, getting towards the very tail end of the holiday season. We do hope everybody had a very Merry Christmas, a great holiday, safe travels as you were traveling around. Hopefully you were listening to some ITG along the way. We are, of course, brought to you in part by our friends at Bet Online. The game starts here. We hope everybody is getting ready for a great new year, having a happy new year, depending on when you're listening to this. And, of course, with that, new year, new kind of around campus things to be keeping an eye on. Of course, I think at the forefront of that are basketball programs. Women's basketball just starting the conference slate a few days ago and getting into it. Men's basketball team starting on Tuesday. Hey, you want to talk about getting right into it? Kansas on Tuesday to get us going, baby. Hey, fresh out of the frying pan and into the fire as we got the Jayhawks to start things off of the Big 12 slate. So, Jed, Happy New Year. And, hey, as always, might be the holidays, but plenty of moving and shaking.
Why stick a toe in when you can dive head first into the
right.
Big
No
12
kiddie
schedule,
pool here,
right?
baby.
Yeah, and no kiddie pool here. So, first of all, as you said, hats off to men's and women's teams, doing some pretty cool stuff. Got a lot of people excited. There's an interesting vibe, an interesting energy that is around Morgantown right now. And of course, central to all that is Ren Baker and a lot of the moves and the shaking and baking that he's done. But and speaking of basketball, Wes, it's a good segue to our poll. Our Twitter poll. We put a poll up on Twitter, brought to you by our friends at Toothman Ford, of course. And I think I have to give credit to Tony, because somebody mentioned to me, Tony's the one who first mentioned. I didn't hear it, but I'm thinking that's where it came from.
Okay.
Tony maybe had mentioned that the football program, since we joined the Big 12, was at exactly 500 since joining the Big 12 in conference play. So once again, when I hear something like that, the gray matter gets stirred and I start wondering things. So I did a deep dive and I thought, okay, I put a Twitter poll out on the ITG In the Gun podcast at In the Gun podcast on Twitter, on X, whatever we're going to call it now. And the poll is quite simply, since joining the Big 12 Conference, 2 of these 3 WV programs have posted a record in league play of exactly 500. Which program has been sub 500? Your 3 choices were football, men's hoops, baseball. Now, for transparency's sake, in real time, we still have a couple hours left on the poll, but we have 560 or so votes under the Toothman Ford poll/trivia question. So we're going to go ahead and give the results. 54% of fans said football is the program under 500 since
wrong.
We started. Yeah, well, that's wrong, obviously, based on, again, I'm going to give credit to Tony. He deserves credit anyway if he didn't say it. So let's say Tony said it. So we know football is wrong. They're exactly 500. Baseball is also exactly 500. 12% of the fans picked baseball. Only 34% got it right with men's hoops. Men's hoops about to start, as we talked about, against Kansas in league play. So far since joining the Big 12 in league play, this is confined to Big 12 conference games. The men's team is 13 games under 500. So that's the one of the three programs. And I also checked women's, and women's is above 500. Matter of fact, I'm pretty sure it's double digits above 500. So hats off to the women's program. But there's your answer to our ITG poll. The men's hoops team is 13 games under 500. Well, strangely enough, 12 years into the Big 12, football is exactly 500
Yeah.
and baseball is exactly 500. That's very
That is
strange.
pretty wild. That is wild. I figured it had to be baseball or hoops when you posted that, just because they have each had some really bad years, like the football team hasn't necessarily had, right? Like even some of the down years for football, we've still maybe only been a game or two under 500 in Big 12 play. Whereas, whereas for basketball, like last year, for example, I mean, we just got smoked in Big 12 conference play. I know for the baseball team, I mean, Jed, a decade ago, they were really just starting to get that thing humming and really invest in the program. They had a couple rough years there at the start of the Big 12. But yeah, I mean, I think especially when you say 13 games under, I mean, it's probably about what the team was last year. You know what I mean? Which makes a lot of sense. They would probably be pretty close to 500 if they wouldn't have had that, just albatross of a season last year. So that makes sense.
What was the last really bad year Hugs had? 4 or 5 years ago?
Yeah, like 18,
really
18 or 19 or something, right before the COVID year. When remember we were humming, we were ranked like 12th in the country right before everything. We would have been a 2 or a 3 seed in the tournament, and then everything got shut down. So
interesting to look at that way, but
it is.
Hopefully pretty soon all three will be over 500.
That's right.
Significantly so. But again, men's basketball plays more games than not more games than baseball, but baseball's just strange. I think the number was 131 and 131 or something like that. That's really strange. But football, it's almost like we've had like a 2-7, a 3-6, a couple 4-5s, but also a 7-2, a 6-3.
Right.
Yeah, there you go.
And of course, that poll brought to you by our friends at Toothman. We all know cars cost less in Grafton. Big shout out to JR and everybody there at Team Toothman. And you know what, Jed, before we go to break, of course, this is the meat of this episode is going to be some Zac Alley conversation that we're going to get into here in just a few minutes. But first, Jed, obviously, he is not the only new name, the only new face involved in this, well, first Rich Rodriguez staff, second edition, right? 2.0 edition of Rich's inaugural coaching staff in Morgantown. So before we get to Zac Alley in our kind of, meat and potatoes, what else do we have on some new staff moving and shaking and hires that have happened here recently as well?
Yeah, we'll pivot out of that. Let me say one thing real fast as we're going to jump into some of these names floating around the staff. Follow us on Twitter, obviously. But the other thing, Wes, this is the time of year where I pop the hood and do the biggest self-scout on the program. It stands out to me that 70% of our viewers / listeners aren't subscribed. So do us a solid. Just click the subscribe button. It helps the algorithm. It helps us, especially on YouTube. It does us a major favor. So 70% of those listening, we have growing crowds, but 7 out of 10 aren't subscribed. Do the simple thing, subscribe. You'll get notified when you have new episodes on that line. I'm not going to bore you with the pitch. You know the deal. So please subscribe if you aren't already. Now, jumping into some of the names. Let's start on the defensive side. It was finally floated publicly that Jeff Castile on some level will be involved. That's one of the greatest state secrets kept in a while. It's been under wraps for more than a couple days. But Jeff Castile will be involved. It's just with some of these, it's going to be a function of the where more than the who in terms of what their assignment might be. Again, we're somewhat following the NFL model where you have basically a primary assistant at each position and then somewhat of a secondary assistant. You can kind of break it down now because a few years ago when the NCAA allowed you to have all these on-field coaches, it completely changed the dynamic. Whereas these guys used to be analysts, couldn't do on-field coaching. That's all changed. So now you have many more coaches with their hands on in terms of game planning and instructional value on the field. So Jeff Castile is going to be involved, and that's tremendous news for everybody. I mean, one of the things Owen and I were talking about recently was when the news with Zac finally was starting to break. Yeah, I'm excited to have Zac Alley. running the West Virginia defense. But I'm also excited to have Jeff Castile kind of sort of involved in some kind of role. A guy who's won 3 BCS bowls, a D coordinator at West Virginia under 3 different head coaches. That's not a bad thing. A guy who coached one of the greatest defenses in the history of the school in 2010. That's not a bad thing. Jeff Castile, I've been doing battle, Rich and I have, with this guy since the early 90s for 30 plus years when he was the D coordinator at Shepherd University. Back then it was Shepherd College. I couldn't have more respect for Jeff Castile. So I'm so happy to have Jeff Castile involved. Now, on the defensive line front, William Green, again, we don't know if that's what he'll do. I figured that's what he'll do. He was at Monroe with Rich, which means he was also at Monroe with Zac Alley, Louisiana Monroe, before they went to Jacksonville State. And hear nothing but incredible things about William Green. Everybody that's worked with him loves him. The kids that played for him love him. Great position coach. And a guy like that who speaks the shorthand of the coordinator, of the play caller, is going to be instrumental. So you can kind of start on second base from a technique standpoint up front at the point of attack. So that helps. Again,
Jed,
we'll get
quick,
into the Zac Alley portion of it. Yep.
Just so you know, I work with somebody who played with William Green. Okay?
Did you?
I could probably tell you who it is. He probably wouldn't care, but just, you know how this is, just to be careful. Like, I don't think he would mind. I don't think he would mind me sharing this, but I also didn't tell him I was. So just I work with somebody who probably wouldn't mind if I shared his name, but who knows and played with William Green, and he just said to me, just get ready for some intensity, get ready for some fiery personality. He's going to bring some energy and some enthusiasm to whatever group he's coaching. So just to add to what you said, the people who have played with him, the people who have coached with him, they all rave about him, and he seems like another one of these risers in the business.
So when you jump over to the offensive side of the ball, first let's speak in terms of retention. The first name that we heard floated, and again, assignments, we'll see. But Blaine Stewart's going to be involved. In what capacity? We don't know. You're bringing in a tight end coach that we'll talk about. So maybe Blaine's not with the tight ends anymore. Maybe he's with the slots. Let's check and see. But Blaine's going to be involved. That's also an incredible thing. Awesome. All of us think the world of Blaine Stewart. Nobody's more WVU through and through than Blaine Stewart. Not just because of the connective tissue with his dad, but just he's about all the right things. He's becoming a really special recruiter as he learns the nuances of the college game as opposed to the pro game where he was with Mike Tomlin and the Steelers. He's going to be a tremendous recruiter. And nobody can sell the propositional value of West Virginia University football more so than Blaine Stewart because he believes it through and through. So Michael Nicewander, former SEC guy. He coached Rich's tight ends at Jacksonville State. He's coming up on some level. He's going to be involved. We'll be tight ends again. Stay tuned. Ryan Garrett. Hear tremendous things about Ryan Garrett. We have some mutual friends. They talk very, very highly of Ryan Garrett as a coach, as a guy. So he coached the wideouts at Jacksonville State. Maybe that's what he'll be doing here. We're going to find out. Chad Scott, from a retention standpoint, that was one of the ones that early on you didn't hear Chad's name floated, but then you did. And it was almost like I started hearing in coaching circles through some of my friends, oh boy, Rich reached out to Chad. So here we go again. There's this thing has life. Let's resuscitate the Chad Scott's deal, So couldn't be happier to have Chad Scott involved. Chad Scott is, talk about tremendous recruiter. He's a guy who commands the attention of the room. He makes his position better. All those kids in that room are better because they play for him. And he can go out on the road and win some hearts and minds sitting in living rooms with parents and players as well. So Chad's a great guy. He was a great piece of Neil's staff. He's going to be a great piece to Rich's staff. Of course, Rhett Rodriguez. Rhett played for Rich. He played the position, the quarterback spot. He understands it. He gets it. He and I have had some conversations about what it's like to play for his dad at that spot, at the mission control position. So Rhett's going to bring a lot of value. He played at Arizona. He played at Monroe. And then he was with them as an analyst at Jack State. So he's going to bring, from a big picture standpoint, he's a guy who sees obviously what his dad wants to do, but he also understands the scheme. It's difficult to put a price or quantify the value of somebody that understands the scheme. So that's what you're looking at from. There'll be some other names floated around. Some we're familiar with, but they're not yet probably for public consumption. So we don't really want to mention them. I agree with what you said earlier. Let's take the high road and just let it play out. We're not in the breaking news business. We say that all the time. But let other people do that.
If you're looking for scoop, this is the wrong spot to get it.
No, it's That's not what we're here for. Let it happen, let it unfold, and then we'll talk about it because
We
most
might
of the things, quite frankly, we might
have. Listen, we might have some scoop. All right, we're not Morgantown TMZ up in here. Okay.
No, that's not what we're going to do. We're not about that. It's one of the sometimes it's entertaining, sometimes it's not. But every time the coaching cycles open up at the end of the season, so many of my good friends and lifelong friends are in the industry. So my phone's lighting up just like so many other people's phones are lighting up. And when something like this happens and Rich has come back to town, it's lighting up even more. And I'm having some conversations that are worth chewing on and some conversations that aren't. But quite frankly, what's the value in me jumping on here and, hey, I talked to such and here's what's going to happen 2 weeks from now? There's no value to be found in that. Reporters do it and do it well, sometimes probably even too well. So let them continue to do it. We'll just have fun with once everything's announced. We don't know everything before it happens. Obviously, we don't. I'm not claiming we do, but there are plenty of things that we kind of have a hunch on we're not about to talk about. So that's the nature of the beast, right? But so now that we've buried the lead with Zac Alley.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. Speaking of which, I don't think it would be fair. I'd be giving myself too much credit to say I had a hunch on Zac Alley. But one person who's on this program right now, and may be speaking currently, tweeted 16 days ago about Zac Alley and WVU and how he hoped that he was on the short list or was going to be the guy. And Zac Alley is the guy. I've got some fired up fan thoughts. Jed has got all the numbers, all the X's and O's, everything you need to know. We will deep dive into Zac Alley. Freaking guy's younger than me, the Mountaineers' newest defensive coordinator when we return on the other side. You are in the gun. For nearly 20 years, Fortis has been the nation's leader in providing guaranteed roof performance programs for commercial buildings. Fortis offers roof performance solutions that feature extensive initial and ongoing reconditioning for commercial buildings as an alternative to traditional replacement, with long-term performance guarantees that are backed by global leader Lloyd's of London. Fortis offers a comprehensive range of roof performance management programs that provide financial security, extend the life of our customers' roofs, and make a significant impact on ROI. Fortis is currently improving performance and increasing ROI for customers at more than 4,800 locations, with more than 140 million square feet protected, including many Fortune 500 companies that have turned to Fortis to save money, gain financial certainty, and extend the life of their existing roofs. Fortis has helped customers save more than $520 million in capital roof replacement costs for an average ROI of over 250%. To learn more, visit fortis.us.com. Fortis, roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed.
Nobody supports the blue and gold Mountaineers like Toothman Ford. With over 20 NIL deals and counting, Toothman Ford continues to rally behind our student athletes. And it's time we rally and support the dealer that supports the Mountaineers. Not only does Toothman Ford offer the best prices in the state on pre-owned, their never over MSRP campaign on new Fords guaranteed to save you thousands. Drive with pride all season long, knowing you're supporting the dealer that fuels our Mountaineers. Toothman Ford, where cars cost less, in Grafton and at toothmanford.com.
At Johnston Equipment, you'll find the area's best selection of Coyote tractors and loaders. Stop in and see all our compact equipment with multiple options available, including full cab, diesel, rubber tires, or track loaders. You'll find attachments and implements to get anything done, and low-rate financing options. Johnston Equipment has what you need to get the job done right. Come see the full line today at Johnston Equipment on Route 33 between Weston and Buchanan, or visit JohnstonEQ.com.
Back in the gun here as we roll along and we continue, or maybe begin to, finally, officially get into the reaction of the hiring of Rich Rodriguez, his first defensive coordinator of his second tenure as the head coach of the WVU Mountaineers. It is Zac Alley, and I made a joke about how this guy is younger than me, and yes, he is quite literally younger than me. He is just 31 years old. I mean, I'm 33. Like, I'm not that old. He's younger than me. When he was hired by Louisiana Monroe, he was just 27, the youngest defensive coordinator in all of FBS. As Jed mentioned, he was at Jack State with Rich Rod as the defensive coordinator before he moved to Oklahoma. He, of course, spent a ton of time with Brent Venables, the now head coach of the Sooners, who was the longtime defensive coordinator for Clemson under Dabo Sweeney when Clemson won those 2 national championships. Zac Alley was a GA for Venables, and one of his another mentor type for Zac Alley. So he's got some incredible experience with different programs at different levels and with, I think, different big names across the collegiate football landscape. So I kind of joked about it, but I was also being serious. The day Rich Rodriguez was hired, December 14th, he did a sit down. I mean, look at this, Jed. We got to get TC on the podcast. This is the second time he's getting a shout out. Rich Rodriguez, the day he was hired at the Coliseum, did a sit down with Tony Caridi, one of those United Bank playbooks, right, that gets shared on all the WVU social media. And TC asked Rich about his defensive coordinator, and Rich said, I've got two guys in mind. We're working on it. I've got two guys in mind at the moment, something along those lines. I tweeted that out, and I said, Rich Rodriguez says here he's already got two guys in mind for his defensive coordinator. I really hope Zac Alley is one of them. It's on my Twitter page from December 14th. And December 29th, 15 days later, it is officially Zac Alley on a 3-year deal. So you already know, Jed's got the numbers. Jed's got the real facts here to get you excited. But for me, from the WVU fan, WVU season ticket holder, initials or WVU super fan instant reaction, I'm thrilled, but I'm going to give you 3 specific reasons why I'm thrilled, okay? Number 1 is this. I believe this is the type of hire that WVU should be making. And what I mean by that is young and up-and-coming guys in the industry. Rich Rodriguez coming back to WVU is obviously a different story. When we hired Bob Huggins 20 years ago, almost now, that was obviously a different story. Those are WVU guys who played sports here, who grew up in the state. But I think for the most part, when WVU is hiring head coaches in any sport, it should be a younger, up-and-comer, not somebody with necessarily the lengthiest track record of accomplishment and proven record and resume and all that stuff, but someone who's on the rise and destined for great things, who we could kind of be getting at the front end of that greatness, right? Like a John Beeline, like a Rich Rodriguez when he was here last time, like a lot of other examples. So these are the type of hires that get me excited. Are the ones that are these guys that it feels like, hey, if we lose him in 4 or 5 years and he becomes the head coach at Ohio State or something like that, fine, that's great. That means he did a fantastic job. These are the type of hires I like to see us make. Up-and-coming guys who we might be getting them 3, 4, 5, 6 years before the rest of the football world really has them as a hot name on their list. That's number 1. Number 2 is, and we can get into some of these specifics more when they come out, but I think everybody is realizing we paid Zac Alley a nice contract. We gave him a nice contract to come here. That whole highest paid assistant coach in the history of WVU athletics thing, and we'll get into some of the exact numbers later on, but I mentioned in our Rich Rodriguez episode that one of the things that would really get me excited is if I saw this promise of all the money and the investment that was coming with Rich come to fruition. Yeah. I think the exact thing I said to you and Schuyler and Owen, because we were all in the episode together, was I want to see that money gun go brr. Well, you know what, Jed? That money gun went brr, 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 brr. And that gets me excited because that is, if not half the battle, maybe more of college athletics now. For us to be able to go toe-to-toe with an SEC program and come out with our hand raised in contract negotiations, that doesn't happen often. It's like the Baltimore Orioles getting a lick on the Red Sox or the Yankees, okay? It does not happen very often, and that's exciting. And then number 3, and this is probably just the petty guy in me that, had Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray and all these Oklahoma teams just rip my heart out and stamp on it for a decade. Oh, the meltdown from Sooner Nation. Like these absolute brats who have been spoiled and you can tell have never gone through something like this. It is amazing. And that too, like they're not even trying to hide the fact that they think, a lot of times when you see programs lose a coach, right, they'll do the whole like, he's not that good. We didn't like him anyways thing. Like they are full-blown melting down, embarrassing themselves like a bunch of spoiled brat toddlers who for the first time walking through Toys R Us, mommy and daddy told them they couldn't have the toy that they wanted. It is absolutely fantastic. I think Sooner fans, I know in the 2.5 years of this podcast I've said this before, but I'll use the Red Sox-Yankees example again. They skate by too often because, like, Texas is the Yankees, right? Like, the horns down is the real New York Yankees that everybody likes to rip on. But Sooners, they're just about as pompous. They're just about as entitled. They're just about as insufferable. And I love seeing this Sooner meltdown of, how the heck did we lose a coach to West Virginia? Because those guys have, I mean, listen, I'm not going to deny it. They've given us swirlies. They've given us wedgies in large part for the past decade when we were in the Big 12 before they left. It is nice to see the Baltimore Orioles get a lick back on the Yankees or the Red Sox. And so for all those reasons, Jed, kind of a lot of different type of points and things there. But I am thrilled. I am fired up. I'm excited about. Listen, nothing is guaranteed. I am not sitting here telling you that I know that Zac Alley is going to be a bona fide stud defensive coordinator, but you just want to see boxes checked of the best chance to get a bona fide stud defensive coordinator. And nothing is guaranteed in this business, but I think this is about as excited as you can realistically be at this point. At least I am.
Best thing you can do is position yourself to out-leverage other players in the market. And when you consider the other players in the market for Zac Alley, that's a big get. You don't know how a recruit's going to work out when you land a 5-star, but you position yourself as favorably as possible by winning as many of those types of battles as you can. And it's not often that West Virginia gets to win those types of battles. Now, you could argue all the live long day the why behind it. Is it because he doesn't want buried behind Brent Venables not getting credit because Brent Venables, as a coach with a defensive pedigree, he's a defensive coordinator for him. They're always going to say it's Brent Venables' defense. Is it because he's worried about the relative stability of Brent Venables' staff? Because let's face it, they have another 500 season next year in Norman. They might be looking for work. But I'm going to consider this at this early juncture. We've seen what played out on the field versus Oklahoma. Not since the runaway beer truck was shoved down their throat have we kind of had our way with them. We knocked off an Oklahoma team a couple years ago in Morgantown with Garrett making plays, but we didn't really take anything from them. You know what I mean?
That was a 6-6 team, right?
It's been a while since we took something from Oklahoma. I mean, you can beat somebody, but you don't always take something coveted from them. When Owen and those guys with Coach Stu, they took something from them. Ranked number 3 in the country. They thought they were the best team in America. They were ticked off. They weren't in the national championship game. How dare you pit us against little old West Virginia? We took something from them, okay? Well, once again, we're taking something from Oklahoma, something they don't want to give up, something we had to pry from their cold, hard hands, right? I'm going to consider this the curse of TJ Simmons. It's going to start the curse of TJ Simmons.
I love this.
Yes, we'll block you out of bounds.
And if you understand, listen,
physical.
If I was going to say, if you understood what Jed's reference was there about a half second after he said it, like I did, you're a real one. Okay, you could hang out with us. You could sit at this table anytime.
And the TJ Simmons debate will rage on forever. You got to be smarter than that. You can't block him out of bounds. It says nobody that ever sat in a film room and the entire team cheers as somebody blocks another player who was engaged.
Also, how many times have you seen that called since then? That was Thanksgiving of 2018. How many times have you seen that called in the 6th season since then?
I can't tell you how many times, and Owen's talked about this, how many times I've seen a player cheered by their entire team watching film when they block a kid 30 feet out of bounds. The entire team erupts. You're about all the right things when you do that. We were penalized for it. You could say maybe it didn't cost us the Oklahoma game in 2018.
A 14-point swing on a 3-point game.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because we know what happened after that. Now we're way out in the weeds. Okay. But I'm going to consider it the curse of TJ Simmons. And here's how I want the curse of TJ Simmons to unfold. It's not enough to steal your D coordinator. I want to throw kerosene on this burgeoning fire. There's some embers and it's starting to burn a little bit. And there's conversations taking place. Did Oklahoma make a mistake by leaping from the Big 12? Kind of sort of like Nebraska made a mistake leaping from the Big 12, giving up the lifeblood of what they were with their recruiting ties to Texas, and now they've been buried in anonymity for 2 decades. Let's hope Oklahoma does indeed become the Nebraska of the SEC, and they are buried forever. Let's hope the curse of TJ Simmons might strike.
Listen, many are saying Norman's just the new Nebraska. I'm just saying. I'm
That's
just
what I'm saying.
saying.
There's good people. There's good people in Oklahoma. There's not so good people in Oklahoma, just like anywhere else. I got some friends out there. But after the way you've kind of owned us and slapped us around, broken our hearts, I mean, not even Tavon at a gazillion yards could knock these guys off, right? I mean, they still found a way to win that game. So it's something of tremendous value. And it's been since January of 2008 that we managed to take something of tremendous value from Oklahoma, which, oh, by the way, was the second time we did it. Yes, we beat them a couple years ago. I don't want to undervalue that. A win is a win. Okay, I'll take any win we can get. But what we took from them in 2008 left a mark. What we took from them on September 11th, 1982 in Norman left a mark. That was a top 10 team that Don Nealon built a program on and sent them reeling. Would they lose 5 games that year after we knocked them all? So if in fact we can take this and parlay it into something special, which I hope and believe we can, we're going to get into some of the numbers and logistics and the backstory on what in fact Zac Alley is. But yes, whether it hurts Oklahoma or not, that's just icing on the cake. That's the truth of the matter. But the thing about this is what you've got in Zac Alley. It's interesting how this unfolded. I put, my little narrative out on social media, and I never underestimate the connectivity of college football. His first year as a student assistant, not a graduate assistant, a student assistant. Now, for those unfamiliar with the situation, student assistants volunteer literally for nothing, literally for nothing. I mean, they're not getting graduate school paid for. They just want to coach football. And they're doing it pretty much for free, a couple free meals here and there. And I got buddies
couple hoodies and sweatpants and hats.
Couple hoodies, that's right. Well, his first year in doing that with Clemson and Dabo was 2011 going into the 2012 Orange Bowl. We all know what happened there. West Virginia, Geno Smith and company, Dana Holgorsen comes out, drops 70 points on that Clemson team, the most points ever scored in a bowl game by any team. The next day, Kevin Steele and the defensive staff for Clemson are fired. Kevin Steele is replaced by Brent Venables, and the wheels are set in motion. They start turning. Brent Venables now comes to Clemson to join that staff that, once again, young Zac Alley as a volunteer student assistant was part of. So over the course of the next 10 years, Brent Venables stays there, 7 more of which, so does Zac Alley. He works his way from student assistant up to this glorious promotion and being an actual graduate assistant. And that's really what he was.
Getting some tuition covered.
Yes. Student assistant to GA. But all the while, he's getting paid something that's a lot higher value than a pay stub. And that is knowledge, experience, working under a guy like Brent Venables, mastering his system, speaking his language. And he parlayed that, as everybody who's ever been around Zac Alley will tell you, he's just short of a genius. Maybe he even is a genius off the field. I'm saying outside the lines of football. A buddy of mine told me, a mutual friend, he thinks he got Zac Alley got a 32 on his ACT. So he's legit, crazy smart, right? Just wicked smart. And he brings that intelligence to football. And he studied under Brent Venables for all those years at Clemson, won 2 national championships as part of that staff with Brent Venables. And then he moves on. What happens? Terry Bowden gets the Louisiana Monroe job. My former coach, Terry Bowden, that I played for at Samford when Jimbo was my quarterback coach. We've talked about it many times on here. He gets the Louisiana Monroe job because nobody else wants it, kind of, sort of. So in 2021, guess who his O coordinator was? He brings in Coach Rod. Coach Rod has a history with Terry. So he brings him in. I still kind of wonder if he brought him in to get Rhett as his quarterback. I mean, that's what Terry joked about. So Rich comes in as his O coordinator. And this young little, seedling comes from Clemson as the D-core. Actually, I take that back. He spent some time at Boise first for a couple years. Again, cutting his teeth, learning some things. He was a special teams coordinator. He was a position coach. I don't want to sell that short. Spent a couple years at Boise, then gets the coordinator job at Louisiana Monroe. And in 2021, you talk about a talent deficit. Everybody that Louisiana Monroe faced, they confronted a major talent deficit. What happens is, out of the gates, I remember a buddy of mine, his son was on that staff. And he told me when they faced Dion at Jackson State, I remember him breaking down Jackson State tape and saying, what are these guys doing as they were facing Dion? Well, Monroe found a way to beat Jackson State, who was an FCS. So they got off to a sluggish and slow start. They're 2-3, and it's a miracle they won the 2 games they did. But meanwhile, halfway through the season, here comes Malik Willis and a 5-1 Liberty team, sizzling as a 31-point favorite coming into Monroe, Louisiana, to face the Louisiana Monroe and Terry Bowden squad. Wouldn't you know it, young Zac Alley, as an unproven, untested defensive coordinator, and Coach Rod running the offense under the guidance of Terry Bowden as the head coach, they upset Louisiana Monroe as a 31-point dog. They did so in part because Zac Alley got Malik Willis's head and forced 3 critical interceptions. That's how upsets happen, right? Turnovers. That's one of the things we're going to get into when you watch trends emerge with Zac Alley. But that was a big win for them. It was a season in which they struggled at large throughout the course of the year. Of course, the next year, Rich gets the Jacksonville State job, which was FCS, with the intention of moving up to the G5 level. He brings, why wouldn't he, Zac Alley with him. He liked what he saw. Why wouldn't he? He recognized the talent deficiency, but Zac Alley was really trying to make lemonade out of these lemons. And when you look at his tendencies at Louisiana Monroe, and when you watch what he did on tape at Louisiana Monroe, there are some stark differences in terms of what he did there versus what he's done at Jack State, what he's done at Oklahoma. Why wouldn't there be? The personnel was completely different. You had personnel in which you were in a chase position every week. So you were forced to do some things. Like, for instance, he blitzed way more at Louisiana Monroe because sometimes he had to throw his hands in the air and just roll the dice. As far as a pressure rate standpoint, at least trying. It didn't work, but he was trying it. So Rich gets the Jack State job, brings him with him. Next thing you know, they go 9-2 the next year. And in 2023, they make the leap into the G5 level. Okay, so now they're trying to win a conference. And they go out and they do so. They win 9 games again. Now, that's when what you saw in terms of the Zac Alley that people now know and love really kind of started to emerge. The second year at Jack State. Now, some people have said, well, what are we getting with this guy? Is he an even front guy? Is he an odd front guy? Are we running the odd stack again? Are we going to run a 4-2-5 like Brent Venables was famous for at Clemson, an even front guy? So he has an even front pedigree, but it's very interesting. He's coached to what he had. For instance, at Jack State, they felt that they didn't have a lot of D linemen. They didn't have a lot of backers. So first and second level players weren't abundant, but on the third level, they had a few more playmakers and a little more depth. So from a alignment standpoint, he put that to great use. He basically ran 3 down with 2 backers behind it and 6 DBs, a 3-2-6. He ran that. Only one team in America ran more of that than Jacksonville State in 2023. So it was this odd configuration of a 3-2-6, and then sometimes he'd put 2 defensive linemen down and have 3 backers. Maybe you want an extra edge rusher. So he'd have 3 backer types on the second level, but once again, he would have 6 defensive backs because that was the position group they were the most comfortable with. Sometimes he would run an odd stack, but when you look at it, 22% of the time, that's what he did. The old 4-2-5, only 8% of the time. So he had a lot of different looks in terms of what he was doing. And when you study what he was doing on tape, the one consistent piece was he wants to get you behind the sticks and win on third down. And he likes to, and here's why I think he's such a great match as a defensive play caller for Coach Rod. Coach Rod is a guy that if you study what he does and how he coaches the game, everybody on some level is involved with leverage and trying to win leverage in the game of football, and that's how you win games, right? Well, that's really been one of Rich's greatest strengths his entire career, winning leverage. That's why speed matters so much to him. That's why there's such a premium on speed, because when you have a fast kid, that gives you an advantage when you're trying to out leverage people, whether it's offensively or defensively. So when you watch Zac Alley's defenses, they play with tremendous leverage. They're disciplined. They're fundamentally sound. They get to their fits. There's not a lot of missed assignments, not a lot of blown assignments or miscommunication. Now, it's somewhat of a more advanced scheme. You'll see a lot of communication, especially on the second and third levels with the backers and the DBs, and they got it buttoned up. They really do. Once he gets his type of kids, which are going to be smart, tough kids, and again, Rich puts a premium on speed irrespective of what position you're playing. That's one of the reasons, or some of the reasons, that he was so successful at Jacksonville State. And he wants to win on third down. And he's a very analytics-driven guy. That's the type of coach that he is. It's almost like When you think of Sean McVay, the head coach of the Rams, how he ascended through the coaching ranks as such a young coach, an up-and-comer, you heard his name mentioned so many times before he got his first head coaching job in the NFL as an analyst and a coordinator, a position coach, moving his way up. Very analytically driven. Well, I kind of see Zac Alley on some level, kind of sort of, as a defensive version of that type of coach that Sean McVay is. He wants to understand the tendencies he's going to face. So he's all about tendencies. He wants to break it down from a personnel standpoint, from a formation standpoint, from a down and distance standpoint, and come into the game with a very good understanding, especially on third down, of how he can beat you more often than not and win those third down situations. So many games, Wes, can be won by winning on third down. We've talked how many times on this show? There are three things you can do in the modern game of football, not just college football, but pro football, to win. It's no longer holding teams to 275 yards and 13 points a week. You can't do that consistently enough. You have to win situationally. You have to hold teams to touchdowns instead of field goals instead of touchdowns in the red zone. You got to force turnovers to steal possessions, and you got to win on third down to get them off the field. So now all these things connect. It's so fascinating when you look at some of the numbers that I'm going to break down for you. First of all, we talked about some of the alignment configurations that he used at Jacksonville State. Well, even when you move it down in distance, he stayed true to what he was on early downs with those 3-2-6 looks, those 2-3-6 looks, keeping those 6 DBs on the field. Well, let's fast forward to what he did when he got to third down. Still, a lot of that 2-3-6 type look, but he even sometimes brought a 7th DB out onto the field. It depended on what he was facing and how he was trying to win. But he's very heavy in zone coverage. So is Brent Venables. Very heavy in zone coverage. His zone coverage rate on third down, this was in 2023, his last year at Jacksonville State, was 12th in the country, 61% of the time. So he's going to bring pressure packages, but he wants eyes on the quarterback. And that's what's fascinating when you watch tape. He wants to stop you on early downs, get you behind the sticks on third down. And one of the games I remember going back and watching was Jacksonville State went into Bryce Williams Stadium and almost upset. They had South Carolina beat dead to rights. They're down 31-28, 2 minutes to go, and they have 1st and 10 at the South Carolina 13 in the Battle of the Gamecocks. They throw a pick 6 and lose 38-28. So in a game they're supposed to get smoked by 30 or 40 points, they should have won that game. They came a turnover away. In part, how did they do that against Spencer Rattler and that South Carolina offense? Well, South Carolina was 4 of 14 on third down. And when you look at some of the things that Zac Alley was dialing up on those third downs, when he gets them into a 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8, he likes to play from depth with his defensive backs so he can put them in a downhill posture. So sometimes you would even have what amounts to a robber safety, but he wasn't aligned as a robber. He would align with a little more depth. And you could tell he would spring forward on the snap looking for quick crossing routes, which are so often the answer for offenses on these 3rd and intermediate or even 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8 situations. And they would just make a play on it. And they kept stopping these third down attempts by South Carolina. Throughout the course of 2023, that's what Jack State was doing. They would get you into 3rd and long often, which also means they don't give up a ton of long plays. They force, and this is something else he's very good at, they force more third down situations than most defenses. So what's that do? A critical piece to game planning offensively, entering a game to get ready for third down, is you want your best calls available on third down. You face so many third downs. It's not 12 or 13. Sometimes it's 17, 18, 19 third downs that you're facing because it's tough to get 10, 15-yard gains against Jack State. So you're going to face a lot of third downs. He's going to force you to string drives together, which means you better have a ton of really effective and good calls available on third down because he's going to force you to burn and cycle through those things, which is another reason he wants to understand to the 100th degree all your tendencies on third down. The personnel you're wheeling out, the formation you're lining up in, the position on the field, whether it's left hash, right hash, center, whatever it might be, he wants to understand and master those tendencies because he wants you to burn through the best calls you have, and that's how he wins on third down. First of all, he has good calls. Second of all, he's going to force you into way more third downs than you're used to facing. And that's one of the things he also did at Oklahoma. Now, what he did with Oklahoma as a pivot, Oklahoma, obviously more than Jacksonville State, as you might expect, from a personnel standpoint, they have more NFL caliber edge rushers. They have more big-bodied, one-gap, defensive tackle type playmakers that can fire up the field and make a play. So it makes sense that when he rejoined Brent Venables at Oklahoma, it wasn't as much of this odd configuration or even 2 down as much as it was 4 down and traditional 3 down. So when you look at his tendencies there, again, this is all downs. They ran a 4-3 or some version of it 17% of the time, which is the 12th highest rate in the entire country. They ran a 3-4 or some version of it 23% of the time, 19th most in the country. So more traditional. But there were times he would pivot back to the stack. There were times they would move into that 4-2-5, which they have a history with. And as you advance on downs, once again, big on zone coverage. They're going to take chances. Sometimes they're going to take chances in man and roll the dice, and they will give up some big plays in the throw game. But more so than anything, they're going to force you to try and drive by and large, and that's a tough way to make a living for an offense. So when you advance to 3rd down, once again, look at the tendencies on 3rd down. They were in a 3-4 or some version of a 3-4 20% of the time. That was the 12th highest rate in the country. A 4-3, 17% of the time. Why? Why not these quirky fronts that he was using at Jacksonville State? Because you have NFL caliber defensive linemen. So whatever he ends up getting at West Virginia, if you have an NFL kid, he can absolutely plug them in and make it fit his scheme perfectly. If you have fringe kids that aren't necessarily next level players, there's also answers to that he can dial up and get creative with. But what I like more so than anything is him getting in the head of the offensive play caller and the quarterback and trying to snatch away the things that have a way of making us quarterbacks feel safe. These quick answer throws. He typically has a defender. Like I saw him make a play, his defense make a play against Jacksonville State, and it was another critical 3rd down. I think it was in the 4th quarter of the game. They had a twist, a stunt on, and one of the defensive linemen peeled back, and and that's one of the things he'll do too with these simulated pressures. It looks like they're bringing pressure, but they're not. They'll drop into coverage, which throws the quarterback off as well. Well, this kid dropped into coverage and batted the ball into the air. Otherwise, the robbing safety would have picked it off. So he had 2 defenders in what was going to be the throwing lane that South Carolina thought they were in a good play to convert this 3rd down. That's the type of stuff that you'll see with him. Once again, from a blitz standpoint, it's technically only 24% of the time, but he's doing so many things and this is on 3rd down at Oklahoma last year. I'm trying to compare and contrast what he did at Jack State, what he did at Monroe, what he's doing at Oklahoma. And there's some common threads that string these things together. But that's what makes it fit. He has a background in an odd front, a background in an even front. He can move back and forth. You want versatility against these modern offenses because you have to have answers. Now, one of the things I'd like to do, Wes, is, and at some point in the offseason, I think what we got to do is we have to do some kind of film breakdown. It's just too. I'm watching this tape on his 3rd down, just his 3rd down reel, kind of like what we did with Garrett. Maybe we'll do something like that last year with Garrett. But at some point in the offseason, I do think we need to do that. But when you look at the numbers, I want to focus on the ones that I view as critical. Okay, I'm looking at 3 things here. Let's toss out the Monroe thing. He was first learning to be a defensive play caller. He was so shorthanded from a talent standpoint. It's almost not fair to look at some of the desperation and stress that he had there. So I want to look at his last year at Jack State in 2023 and this past season in Oklahoma. And then I'm going to compare it to the struggles West Virginia had defensively this year. Okay.
Real quick, before you do that, another thank you to our friends at Fortis and our buddy Rick Lewis for roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed. You got to visit fortis.us.com. I got a pretty sweet Christmas gift, a Ridge wallet from our guy Rick in the mail this past week, and I've already been showing it off everybody I work with. I'm like, check out this wallet, man! Look how cool this thing is. And I'm not a trinkets, I'm not a gadgets guy, you know what I mean? Like, I've been using the same little simple leather wallet, just tiny little thing forever. I carry like 3 or 4 cards with me and maybe like $10-$20 at a time. Like, I don't have one of these big, huge, I got my ID, my credit card, like my badge to get into work. That's about it. And $10-$20. But this Ridge wallet that Rick sent me with the Fortis engraved in on it and everything, it's pretty sick. So big shout out to Rick and everybody at Fortis.
Huge shout out to Rick. When I got my wallet in the mail, I'm a technical idiot. I'm sitting there fiddling with this thing, trying to figure out how to work.
I'm watching a YouTube video. I'm watching a YouTube video, Jed, on how to work a wallet. And like,
Yeah.
I'm 33 years old. All right. I'm not like AARP. Okay. Like, but this thing is sweet.
I am. Yeah. I'm borderline. So it's like, I remember now I'm truly dating myself. There was a show when I was a kid called The Greatest American Hero. And what happened was it was about a superhero who got this costume from a UFO. But what happened was one of the abilities of the costume was to make you shrink like the size of an ant. Well, he had the instructions in his hand and he shrunk the size of an ant and then enlarged again. So the whole show was he never had the instructions to the suit. So they're on the fly trying to figure this out. That's what I felt like trying to work this wallet.
Yes, yes, that's good.
Greatest
That's
American
great.
Hero.
That's perfect.
So I'm texting Rick, how do I use this thing? I don't even understand. But
That's hilarious.
so yeah, great gift. Shout out to Rick. That's a good call on your part. So when you start breaking down and comparing and contrasting what Zac Alley did at Jack State in 2023, what he did at Oklahoma with Brent Venables this past season, and then some of what West Virginia was confronted with defensively with the struggles we had this year in 2024. Obviously, from a total yardage standpoint, he's been consistently successful in limiting the overall yards that you get. Now, here's what makes that impressive. When you look at his yards per play allowed, Oklahoma this year, 25th in the country, Jack State 2 years ago, 12th in the country. Here's why that matters. And this is something that's not talked about nearly enough. Guess what you're going to have to do when you're coaching a defense with Rich Rodriguez calling the offense? Defend a ton of snaps.
Of course.
Okay. And the last 2 years, guess which defense in Conference USA defended more snaps than any defense in Conference USA? Jacksonville State. So you better be able to hold up for the balance of 60 full minutes and earn your keep. That's why it's more critical, I think, to look to the yards per play allowed, because that means you're well conditioned, you're well schemed, and you're holding up for the balance of those 4 quarters. That's why it really matters. So what I did, Wes, was I wanted to find a way to bake that into the equation. Okay, it's one thing to say you only allowed 21 points a game. But it's another thing to say you allowed 21 points a game, but you're facing 70 snaps a game when some defenses out there are facing 60, right?
Yeah.
That's not tomato. It's not, an equal comparison. It's like oranges and orangutan. So what I wanted to do, I wanted to look at it from a plays run per point scored perspective. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
How many plays did you run versus how many points the opposition scored on you?
Sure.
West Virginia allowed this past season 2 plays run for every point scored. Make sense? So for every 7 points, we were only defending 14 plays. For every 20 points, we were only defending 40 plays.
So if the other team's getting 60 plays against us on average, we're giving up 30 points. Yeah,
exactly.
Ain't great. That ain't great.
No. Now Oklahoma this year with Zac Alley, 3 plays per point scored. So if you're running 60 plays against Oklahoma, you're not getting 30 like you were against West Virginia. You're getting 20. Okay. Again, this factors in because with Rich, you're going to have to defend a lot of snaps. Now, he can dial it down. The beauty of his style of no huddle, because we're running the football so effectively and so frequently, is he can kind of grab control and the flow of a football game any point he wants because we're not so reliant on the pass game. So if he wants to slow things down and give his defense a breather, he absolutely can. But you're going to have to defend a lot of snaps. So West Virginia this year, a point allowed for every 2 plays you faced. Oklahoma this year, a point allowed for every 3 plays you faced. Let's go back to Jack State 2 years ago. A point allowed for every 3.5 plays that you faced. So again, do the math. If you're facing 70 snaps, great, divide that out. You're going to find it's pretty favorable in terms of where you're going to land from your defensive production overall. I mean, that's impressive. I mean, that's way more impressive than being the D coordinator for an offense that plays keep away and simply does nothing but protect the defense.
Sure,
right?
Sure.
That's not what you're doing. I mean, the reason he's getting paid the money he's about to get paid is because he's going to earn it. Right? And Rich knows this. So that's the beauty of it. Now, when you look at from a pass defense standpoint, again, you're not going to slam the door and shut them down, even from a yards per attempt standpoint. You're going to give up some big plays in the pass game. You can't take the chances that a stylistic defense of this style is going to take without sometimes giving up chances. But when you look at it, Oklahoma this year was 44th. But Jack State in 2023 was 94th in the country against the pass. We talked about this before, Wes, though. Don't read too much into that number. They were also playing with a lot of leads. I mean, it's the teams they were facing were playing from behind and had to throw the football and drive those numbers up. Whereas West Virginia this year, 126th in the country, and we weren't defending a lot of leads. We were going to get 271 a game. Now, we talked about those big plays earlier. Big plays come in different forms. You have the 40-plus yard splash play variety, and those are the types of plays that, this defense will sometimes give up. Not to the extent West Virginia was giving them up this past year.
Sure.
West Virginia gave up 23 40-plus yard plays, which was 130th in the country. Jack State gave up 13. Oklahoma gave up 15. So you're trimming that down some. But the key comes here. Plays of 10-plus yards allowed. Oklahoma, the 11th fewest in the country. Jack State, 34th fewest in the country. What did we say earlier? He's going to force you into a lot of third downs. What that means is you have to limit these rhythm-based, rhythm-building type 10-plus, 10 to 20-yard plays offensively. That's what his defense does. It stops those types of plays. So you're going to have to move the chains on third down if you want to sustain a drive. You're not going to be fortunate enough to get a bunch of 10 and 12 and 15-yard plays and matriculate down the field. So from a third down standpoint, Oklahoma, 36%. They were 42nd in the country. He was number one at Jack State in Conference USA in 2023. 22nd in the country. West Virginia obviously struggled mightily this year. But again, let's get into the numbers of the number of first downs they faced. West Virginia this year only faced defensively 156 third downs. We weren't forcing teams into enough third downs. West, that's the 24th fewest third downs faced of any defense in the country. Okay. Now, when you look at Oklahoma, 196 third downs they faced, ninth most in the country. Go back to Jacksonville State, 205 third downs they faced in 2023 with Zac Alley, fourth most in the country. Do you see where I'm going with this? Keep them on the field, which is also, the more you keep them on the field, the more snaps you face, the more snaps they have to run, also more chances at turnovers, sacks, disruptive plays. That comes into play as well. And red zone touchdown percentage. We've talked so many times about how critical that is. First of all, how often do they get into the red zone? But second of all, and just importantly, what do they do once they get there? West Virginia, this was third down and red zone touchdown rate were the two areas we struggled with the most this year. 75% of the time you got in the red zone against West Virginia, you scored. Now, the problem was you were there 48 times, 94th in the country in terms of the rate that we faced. So now let's look at Oklahoma. Only 47% of the time did they allow a touchdown in the red zone, which was 10th best in the country. Only 38 trips, 31st fewest in the country. Go back to Jack State 2023, 54.6% of the time they allowed a touchdown, good for 35th in the country. They didn't let you get there very often. Only 33 trips, 10th fewest in the country. So facing a ton of third downs, but you're not facing a ton of red zone trips. You're forcing them off the field because you're winning those third downs. Sacks, pressure, sacks. 25th in the country, Oklahoma. 13th in the country, Jack State. TFLs, 10th in the country, Oklahoma. 17th in the country, Jack State. Again, what they'll do is overload and confuse your offensive line. So often, a lot of these sacks and a lot of these pressures are going to come out of zone coverage. So you've got a lot of eyes on the football, but at the same time, you're confusing the offensive line, maybe overloading one side, get them to commit or overcommit and waste resources, and then drop back into coverage. We talked about that with what Dave Aranda does with these sim pressures at Baylor quite a bit. So there's some parallels there. And the pressures, obviously, when you look at all pressures collectively, whether it's a sack, whether it's a hurry, whether it's a quarterback hit, whether it's a knockdown, Oklahoma, 34th in the country. Jack State, 9th in the country 2 years ago. West Virginia, 118th this year. We weren't getting to the quarterback or impacting even if you don't sack him, you still got to impact him. That leads to takeaways downstream from the pressure, downstream from all these types of things we're talking about, getting them behind the sticks are the takeaways. Oklahoma forced 21 this year, good for 34th in the country. Jack State 2 years ago with Zac Alley forced 25, good for 9th in the country. West Virginia, that's been our bugaboo for the 6 years Neil Brown was here. Neil kept trying to find ways to force turnover. It was a program-wide problem. And that's one of the things that Zac Alley, the pressure, the fact he gets you off script, the fact that he gets you into third and long, the fact that he wins so many third downs, he gets you to play a more desperate version of offensive football. But I really, really like the fact that he forces you into these third and longs. This is a beautiful formula. It really is, because I'm thinking from an offensive play caller standpoint, that's my background, that's my pedigree. I'm thinking, man, it's tough to come up with, X amount of effective and efficient play calls that you're comfortable with from a game planning standpoint on third down. And the fact that he's going to force you to come up with that many more, wow, that's impressive. So you're winning on third down, you're winning in the red zone, and you're forcing takeaways. So that's where the excitement comes from. All the key metrics that are coveted in the modern game are the things that his defense probably flourishes at the most. Those three critical areas that we talk about so much. That's a reason he's getting paid the big bucks. That's a reason Oklahoma did not want to lose him. So, I mean, he will do some creative things that you see him stray from the Brent Venables tree that are kind of his own thumbprints as opposed to Brent Venables. A lot of that was at Jack State, because what I was watching on tape at Jack State, there were elements of Brent Venables' defensive scheme, absolutely without question. There were elements of it, but it was way more his own thing at Jack State. It really was. It wasn't until you saw him fall back under the Venables umbrella, and because of the talent that he inherited, do things that were much more. Because when you think back to, you remember the Isaiah Simmons kid,
of course,
at Clemson,
yeah, like
that was
top,
just
top 10,
he's
top
still
10,
in the league.
Top 10 pick of the Arizona Cardinals, I
That's
think.
Right. I think he's with the Giants now, maybe. But
Sounds
think
right.
about him. He was kind of this hybrid,
weird
when you get,
tweener.
Absolutely. He was like 6'4", 235.
Just a freak. But it was like, where's he going to play in the NFL?
Yes. It's like he was a Sam backer, but he was also a strong safety, like a nickel type.
Clemson lined him up at like 6 different positions.
Absolutely. And he could play that middle safety spot and rob things. And that's how Clemson was really shutting people down. When you get a difference maker, he was
incredible
like that,
in college. He was incredible.
That's the X factor. But you know what? That's really the only time that you've had that guy in this scheme. It just goes to show you, if you get a guy like that, they can really showcase their talents and abilities, and they will dial it up accordingly, which is what Venables did when he was at Clemson with him. But it's funny, because when he was installing the system and the scheme at Monroe, when he came in from Boise, that's what the staff was sitting down watching. They were watching old cut-ups and different game tapes of Isaiah Simmons at Clemson. Hey, here's what we did at Clemson. It was they were learning it, as Zac Alley was teaching the staff the scheme. But a lot to be excited about, no doubt about it. Like I said, Wes, we're without question going to have to, in the off season, when things slow down, we're going to dive in and do some film study, because the creative things that he brings to the table are fun. Not fun for opposing offenses, but once again, you need to recruit to it. You need to recruit to the speed that's necessary, the intelligence that's necessary, the toughness that's necessary, all the boxes that a Coach Rod player checks as well. But I go back to the one word to me that makes this the beautiful fit that it is: leverage. That's Rich's game. Rich Rodriguez plays the game of leverage. He always has, whether it's special teams and the rugby kick, doesn't matter. He wants to win leverage. He wins it offensively by out scheming you and getting fast kids that even when you maybe get a leverage advantage on him, they'll bounce outside your leverage advantage and you lose contain. But that's what I like when I watch these Zac Alley defenses. They understand leverage. It's tough to break contain on them. It's tough to find them in a poor run fit. They understand how to leverage the football. And at the end of the day, if you reduce football down to its most basic element, that's really what it's about. If you can out leverage the other team at the point of attack on both sides of the football, spanning the entire football field, you're going to win a lot of games. That's how Rich has won a ton of games in his career. I mean, we were doing it throwing the football and out formationing you at Glenville, out tempoing you at Glenville. Different ways to do this. And then here comes Pat White. And here comes Steve Slayton. And there's different ways to do it from a scheme standpoint, from an athletic standpoint. And Zac Alley is a perfect complement on the defensive side of the ball to what Rich does on the offensive side of the ball. And the fact that he's just going to, put his hat on, he's put his whistle on, go to work. I don't care how many snaps I'm defending. I'm here for it. I'm here for it. I'll defend all the snaps you want me to defend. Just tell me when to go stop somebody, and I'm going to go stop somebody.
And again, like I said earlier, nothing is guaranteed in sports at any level, with a player, with a coach. Nothing is guaranteed. But the best you can do is check a bunch of boxes in getting there, right? And from everything that you've described, I mean, like you talked about it, he's played 3-2-6, he's played 4-2-5, he's odd front, even front, whatever it takes. That's what I think the best defensive coordinators do. They don't say this is what we play and this is what we're going to play. They say we're going to do whatever we have to do to make our opponent play left-handed. And that's encouraging to me. That's what I want to see. The 3 key areas that you talk about, that I talk about, that I think most forward-thinking football talk about as it relates to successful, elite, great defense, checking those boxes of red zone percentage, turnovers, and possession down conversion rates. He accelerates in those things. And he has a working experience with Rich Rodriguez and a lot of these guys on the staff already. Nothing is guaranteed, but I don't know how you can't be excited about this. I don't know how you can't think this has a great chance of working out. A final thank you to our friends at Johnson Equipment. You can get 0% financing for 72 months plus a free loader on select Coyote models in stock. You got to visit Johnson Equipment on Route 33 between Weston and Buchanan. And that's, like, again, Jed, the most that you can ask for as a sports fan, I think, is just to put yourself into a situation, hire the right people, and trust them to do the job. And this, again, we will not know for sure until a year, 2 years, 3 years from now if Zac Alley does a good job in Morgantown. But in terms of all the indicators that you want, it's like green light, green light, green light, green light.
It is, and he's a guy that he thinks outside the box, but he understands the limitations of the personnel that he has. He's coached at a place like Louisiana Monroe, which you almost think that, hey, everybody should coach there at least once, right? Because what you're going to be forced to do from a creativity standpoint at a place like Monroe, much less to find a way to beat Liberty with Malik Willis, and you're so outgunned, to find a way to drag them into, isolated Monroe, Louisiana, and put a whooping on them and upset them as a 31-point underdog. That just speaks so much the creativity of what those guys were able to do. And I'm terribly excited about it. I'm terribly excited about what he brings from a big picture standpoint. You don't want to get too caught up in, like, I remember I would talk to Jeff Castile many times through the years, and one thing Jeff didn't like is if you called him a certain type of guy. Hey, you're an odd stack guy. Stop. Just stop. I love the odd stack, and I'll give you 1,000 good things about the odd stack and why you can stop the run with the odd stack. Don't call me that. Don't pigeonhole. Don't call me that. D coordinators don't like that. They kind of sort of understand there's a place for everything. Mm-hmm. Everything, whether it's even, whether it's odd, whether it's pressure, whether it's dropping. And this is a guy that, the Sean McVay piece of it, I haven't heard anybody say that. That's just kind of me piecing it together based on what everyone has told me. I love that example. It sounds like it to me. That's what they're describing. And so I don't want to lay claim to, hey, a former staff member said he's like Sean McVay. No, the way he's been described to me, that's the vibe I'm getting, is a Sean McVay, cutting edge, younger generation, analytically driven, but sees the big picture. Nothing's going to be lost on him. He's incredibly high intelligence. Sean McVay is too. So that's what you're getting. And he's going to be a grinder. I mean, that's the other thing that people who work with him have said. Okay, you're not going to coast. You're going to grind.
Yeah.
And it says so much. If you've worked for Rich and you're coming back to work with Rich, you get it. There's no secrets there. You know what it's all about, and you're here for it. You're here for it, right?
And you know what? And I think a lot of times too, the best grizzled coach. I didn't want to call Rich Rodriguez an old coach, all right, but the best experienced grizzled coaches, they have a lot of those guys who are half their age and cut from a different cloth on their staff. Like, think a lot of the times that Bill Belichick had his best success in New England, it's when he had the Josh McDaniels and the Brian Flores and the Matt Patricias, right? The younger guys with newer, fresher ideas to complement their experience, grizzled, this is what it takes to win in football in every decade, with the younger guy who's got the more, this is how we really do it in this era. Like, again, to me, I will repeat it a million times between now and September. Nothing is guaranteed successful. We could hire Andy Reid and Bill Walsh and dip them in Buddy Ryan. You know what I mean? Like, nothing is guaranteed. But I don't know how this doesn't check every box you're looking for.
What's funny is on a lot of levels, it almost feels like when you reflect back to when Rich was hired to replace Coach Nealon when Coach Nealon stepped down after the Music City Bowl. It almost feels like there's a lot of the same vibes. There's parallel vibes to what Rich was bringing offensively, because if you look at what his resume at the time spoke to, it's very similar. It's very similar to what Zac Alley speaks to on the defensive side.
Had that
So
little bit of experience at Clemson with a lot of lower level experience.
well,
Yeah.
think of it, Wes. It's like Rich went to Tulane with Tommy. Tulane hadn't won since Moby Dick was a guppy. Next thing you know, in large measure because of what they were doing with the creativity offensively and Sean King. Sean King went from being an afterthought to being an NFL draft pick and a starter in a playoff game for the Buccaneers. Well, they were putting up numbers like nobody had ever seen at Tulane. Tulane. They hadn't been to a bowl game forever and a day. So they go unbeaten in 98. So they were doing that with Rich's offense, outscoring teams 45-35, this type of stuff. So he goes from there, from the small level up to Clemson. Again, Clemson have been struggling. Clemson, they were trying to turn things around. They insert Rich's offense into what they were doing. Next thing you know, Woody Dantzler, they're putting up big numbers offensively. They're turning things around. They start with, a 500 season and then build from that. Now, compare that to what you're getting with Zac Alley.
Yeah.
Zac Alley, small school level at Jack State in large measure because of what he was doing defensively. Jack State had success. He moves on to Oklahoma. Say what you want about Oklahoma and how things turned out with a 6-7 season, but the Oklahoma people, the reason they're upset, the reason they're frustrated, all of them will tell you this is the best defense we've had in over a decade. No doubt about it. Now you're taking the most instrumental piece from the best defense we've had in over a decade. So yeah, there's parallels there. The excitement and the vibe of hiring Rich and what he meant on the offensive side of the ball in 2001, it kind of feels that way with Zac Alley heading into 2025. There are no guarantees, but the vibe's the same.
And man, that's a lot of the battle in college sports now too. The momentum, the energy, the attention, and we've had a lot of that the last few weeks. And I think this kind of is a nice, I would say cherry on top, but like we're gonna hit more home runs, all right, between now and September as well too. So maybe, I don't know, maybe this is like the extra scoop of ice cream, and you still have the whipped cream and the cherry to come on that Sunday. But yeah, like I said, I don't know if you'll ever find universal praise and love for a move. I'm sure there's some people out there who don't like it, but I don't know how you can not be excited by this. I don't know how you can't be fired up by this. And like I said, I think the reaction from Norman speaks to that as well too. Like most 99% of Oklahoma people, they're not trying to spin this. Like they are furious that they lost this guy, and especially they didn't lose him to Alabama or Georgia or Clemson or to the NFL. They lost him to Little West Virginia, and it's been. I was just going to say real quick. I had one. Like I said, 99% of Oklahoma fans melting down because they're like, this is another hit, and this is cracks in the system, and what's going on, and how are we losing a guy like this? I had one Oklahoma fan who tweeted me, "Enjoy a coach who isn't that good." If he's not that good, I mean, it is embarrassing that you guys are melting down like this, all right?
Yes, it sure is.
It would make a lot of sense if he's great and you're melting down like this. If he's not that good, the Sooner meltdown, my goodness, we got to send some diapers to Norman.
Oh, well, and no doubt about it. But earlier, I'm trying to remember because I'm glancing at this as we're finishing our housekeeping here. When we were going through the names, the staff names, did we mention Jack McNell? I mean, we were bouncing back and forth. I'm looking at it here. I don't know if we did.
Don't think so.
Okay, Jack McNell Jr. His dad, of course, was the head coach at Boston College. He's famous for snapping the football to Doug Flutie for the Hail Mary that beat Miami in '84. And he's also famous for going 0-4 against West Virginia, just like Doug Flutie did. But Rich actually played against him. Yeah, there was some overlap, I believe, in their careers, and they played against. But also, I think his history with him would be at Ole Miss. I was trying to see the connective dots there. But they cross paths at Ole Miss about the same time. So if you're wondering what the connection there might be, first of all, they played against each other. It's not to say they knew each other back in the '80s, but they were both at Ole Miss round about the same time. So I don't think I was just checking through this, and it looked like we mentioned everybody's name except him that we wanted to mention at least, and we'll mention others later as more things are formalized. But so Jack McNell coaching the O-line, obviously big shoes to fill with Matt Moore, who's now at Virginia Tech. Happy for Matt that he moved on and got another job, but So, and that's always a critical piece. Why not Rick Trickett? Well, Rick Trickett stayed at Jacksonville State. Why did he stay at Jacksonville State? Makes perfect sense because Clint Trickett got the O-coordinator job at Jacksonville State. So why wouldn't he wrap his career up coaching the O-line with his son as the offensive coordinator and play caller? So that's obviously a critical piece to what Rich does. So obviously he thinks highly of Jack McNeil. So we wanted to mention him as well.
Speaking of offensive coordinators, before we go, I guess this is finally, or offensive line coaches, pardon me, not coordinators before we go. I guess this is finally our Bill Badenbaugh revenge 12 years later, right? Oklahoma, yeah. You stole our offensive line coach from Dana 12 years ago, 11 years ago. Now we're stealing your DC, baby. We didn't forget. We never forgot. We just waited to pounce and get our vengeance. It's Badenbaugh vengeance up in here, baby. But listen,
it's the curse of TJ Simmons.
I am hoping that this is West Virginia stock up, Oklahoma stock down, and we can look back at the day that Jed labeled it as the curse of TJ Simmons. But obviously a lot of moving and shaking to get to before then. But that will do it for this edition of ITG. Happy New Year. Safe and Happy New Year. If you're out moving and shaking, be smart, be safe. We'll be talking to you soon. We'll be rolling along here as we go throughout the playoff and bowl season and portal updates and more coaching staff moves. All those good things here. So for Schuyler Callihan, yeah, that's right. Make Jed happy and subscribe to us on YouTube. You 70% of people who watch us but are not. All right.
Yes.
Much like Zac Alley. Let's get those numbers moving in the right direction and those key indicators.
Free.
All right.
Yeah.
For Schuyler Callihan in the Beer Truck Big O, he's Jed Drenning. I'm Wes Uhler. The one thing we ask of you is to be an ear and tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast. Take care, and we'll talk to you soon. You've been in the gun.
ITG.
The fun doesn't have to stop here.
Be sure to hit subscribe and never miss an episode.
If you have any questions, suggestions, or feedback,
be sure to follow us on X at In the Gun Podcast.
Join us again next time.
Until then,
tell an ear to tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast.
This mission is over. It's over.